Welcome to podcast number 8 of Bass Talk with Hagen and Heyes. Today's topic is transcriptions. So, Susan Hagen, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, David Hayes.
And how are you?
I'm doing well. How are you doing?
Very well, thank you. So tell me all about transcriptions.
All about transcriptions. I think transcriptions are really important, especially for double bass players, because I think it really pushes our technique, it pushes our musicality. We can't just sit back on our laurels and think, I can play the Capuzzi Concerto every day for the rest of my life. Not that there's anything wrong with that piece, but it's really nice to be able to strive for beautiful tone and musicality. And, when I was a kid, back in the day, my teachers used to give me the nice, simple, little, easy Bach pieces, pre cello suite type level of playing. And I thought, wow, this is so great. And I didn't initially realize that it wasn't originally written for double bass. But even the little pieces being transcribed really helped my technique, and it helped me think about phrasing. And, it didn't just sound like, that stereotypical, horrible thing that people expect to come out of a bass when they don't know how great our instrument is. And I really think that these transcriptions are tools. And so many people have transcribed. We were talking earlier.
Mm.
Elgar, Dvorak cello concertos, Gary Carr with all these arias and lots of different pieces, being able to imitate the human voice with our instrument. Now that is a delight. What do you think? How do you feel about transcriptions?
I have to say I like them. And I think they've really pushed the bass so far. And I think we're where we are because of transcriptions. Because playing something which wasn't written for the bass means you have to extend your technique and really think about how you're going to play it. And playing unaccompanied Bach, I think, has done wonders for the bass world. When I first started playing the bass, um, a lot of the music I played were transcriptions, and I suddenly realized that we had transcriptions. We also had our own repertoire, but I felt as though we also needed our own repertoire, which is why I started commissioning,
Right.
because I thought then the combination of original repertoire and transcriptions, they each complement each other. Each one has something different to offer. And I've loved transcribing music over the years. I started doing all the quartet arrangements just because when I started organizing workshops. And the one thing I learned very quickly is you have all levels at every workshop you ever do. And they're always the bass four can only play in first position. So a lot of the quartets I arrange now, bass four on the whole stays in first position, maybe going to second or third, but stays down at the bottom end of the register of the bass. But I've absolutely loved transcription. I've loved teaching them. I've loved arranging them. I've loved publishing them, and I really do think the bass world is better because of them.
I think so too. I remember as a youngster, I always thought all the good music, for a young bass player
Mm.
was written for another instrument. And it made me excited that the transcriptions existed, made me a little sad that there wasn't a lot of music that I personally found exciting to play. But I think you're right. All this new music you've written, all the George, we've talked about the series before.
Yeah.
The first position pieces, the danger zone pieces, all of these great music, really beautiful music that didn't exist when I was a kid. So now I think we have a better balance of great transcriptions and music that was written for us. But I find that with my students, they really get a kick out of, even something like the Rachmaninoff Vocalese,
Mm.
and they go on YouTube or Spotify or wherever, and they hear a different instrument playing it, and they come back to their lessons very excited and saying, oh, I was playing along with this recording, trying to phrase it the same way. And I know some people don't love when students rely on recordings too much or if they play along with them, but I think it's a very helpful tool. And to be able to play alongside another instrument, if you're lucky enough to have it in the right key, or my students at Berkeley all know how to transpose it in a recording and not mess with the tempo. It's amazing. But I think it's great because we can strive to be better than double bass was 40 years ago.
I think the first piece, the first transcription I ever played was the Eccles Sonata, really.
Sure.
And what was yours?
I had an album with like a collection, not a recorded album of it was called Bach Pieces for the Young Double Bass Player.
I've got a
And
copy of that.
yes, and
Yes.
that was the first transcription that I'm aware of that I played. Although around that same time, I had a little Beethoven sonatina that was actually a cello part,
Yes.
like, transcribed for cello, then transcribed again for double bass. And I think a lot of what I played in the beginning was, well, we had these books by Samuel Applebaum,
Mm,
and he would have these little shortened versions of familiar tunes. And
yes.
it was cute because if you knew the folk song or the tune that it was, you were playing a melody you recognized, which was good for the student that, could catch their mistakes that way.
Mm,
And now realizing in retrospect, all of that was transcribed. But
mm.
real feeling like I was playing my own solo, that was from the collection of the Bach transcriptions.
I enjoy teaching. I enjoy teaching transcriptions and original repertoire,
Yes.
because each one offers something different to the student. If
Hmm.
if it's one of my pieces, it's written by a bass player, so therefore it works. All you have to do is work out the fingering, how I intended you to play it. If it's written by Beethoven or Brahms or Schubert or whatever, it wasn't written for the bass. So you have to be even more inventive with how you play with the fingerings and the bowings. And I think this really opens up the possibilities for students to really think about what they're doing and how they're doing it and what they want to achieve. And I just enjoy the variety of transcriptions nowadays. And I love the fact that people are transcribing the Elgar Cello Concerto and the Dvorak Cello Concerto and the Butterfly Lovers Concerto and
Yes.
all these things. Um, and it just shows how far the bass has come, that people now have the technique to be able to even tackle these things. Whether I want to listen to them in a concert, I don't know. Um, but the fact that it is now possible is absolutely amazing. And I think
Yeah.
when students hear this, it shows them how far they can go if they choose to.
Right. And I think a lot of the, I'm going to say, sort of smaller pieces, not the big
Mm,
concertos. There's such great tools for learning, and like you said, I like a balance
mm,
of this is a piece written for the double bass, this is a transcription. I like them equally, and I particularly love original pieces for the double bass written by bass players such as yourself. And I'll say to my students, David Heyes plays the double bass. Therefore, this works. We know that this can be done. Whereas sometimes you'll have a piece written by a non double bass player and you think, ooh, they maybe didn't realize, we're tuned in fourths, or there was just a little misunderstanding about how far we can leap, how quickly. And we have enough of those challenges in transcription pieces. But it's interesting because I think there are a lot of pieces that you can transcribe that have been transcribed that are really good learning tools. And then I have a former student who's now in college that just texted me and said, I want to learn a Rachmaninoff cello sonata. Is there a transcription available? And so I looked into it and I asked a couple of my friends who I know have performed it, and they all just use the cello part
mm.
and make modifications personal to them that they need to. So, someday that will probably be published by someone too. But I love the concept that a 19 or 20-year-old student isn't saying, oh, I love that piece. It was written for cello. What a bummer. I'll
Mm,
never be able to play it. That's no
yes.
longer being seen as a limitation. I remember when had just gotten out of grad school, I heard the Rachmaninoff Elegiac Trio, and I thought, "Oh my God, it is so gorgeous!" And so I took the cello part and I played the entire thing at pitch, never dropping anything down. And I thought, "Wow, that sounds heinous," and so I left it. And I realized years later I could make some octave displacements if I needed to and make some modifications so that it sounds beautiful on the bass. But that was, it wasn't the I wasn't taught to do that sort of thing, and I'm not a composer, so my brain doesn't naturally work that way. But I see now, even, high school and college students thinking, I love to play, I love to listen to this piece, I want to learn how to play it. I don't care what it was written for, I want to do it.
I had one student at Wells. He's now studying at university, and he was great because he didn't want to play any bass repertoire. He only wanted to play transcriptions.
Mm.
And we did, I think, a movement from the César Franck Violin Sonata,
Oh,
which
yes.
again was not written for bass, obviously.
Right.
So you really have to rethink um, positions and where you're going to play and hand shapes and all these things, and you have to think outside the box, which is great. And then he wanted to do the Schumann cello concerto, so I think
Mm.
we did part of that. And then he wanted to do Mendelssohn second cello sonata, so we did that. And again, I think there was a published version, but he wanted to create his own edition. So I always had two copies on my music stand. I had the printed edition, and then I had his version. And we'd
Sure.
talk a lot about where you would play that particular phrase and why you would play it there, and why the shift would be between those two notes and not those two notes. And
Right.
I think this is really fantastic for students to really push them forward. So I always say about you're either a musician or you're a bass player. A musician
Right.
plays the music, a bass player plays the notes. There's a difference. And it is so nice that so many bass players now want to become musicians. It has changed over
Yes.
the 40 years I've been teaching. And I do think transcriptions are really such an important part of our repertoire. I think
Yeah.
it really has changed how we play the bass.
Definitely. And like you were saying, on basically every other instrument, the notes are so much closer together.
Mm,
And so if you have a piece written for, let's just say violin, we have to think about the fact that a whole step is inches away for us, and where to shift, there's going to be a lot more shifting. We have to do it in a smart way, efficient as possible. And do you cross strings, or is that going to create a color change that's too
mm,
drastic? Do you have a big shift and just deal with it? And if you choose to do the big shift and deal with it, now your shifting on the instrument is going to get so much better. I actually remember about 5 or 6 years ago, I had a student who desperately wanted to play the main violin theme from Schindler's List
mm.
on double bass. And so I transcribed it for her, which took me forever only because I wrote it out by hand, and wow, I am slow. So I tried doing it in a program, and I was like, oh God, I'm really bad at that. And it was messing up the rhythm and everything. So I just did it by hand. I probably could have just given her the violin part, and then we talked
Mm.
about up an octave, down
Yeah,
octave type things.
yeah.
But she didn't love visualizing music that way. So I wrote it out for her. And that spring, I was playing with the Boston Pops, and John Williams was in town conducting us. And so I spoke with him for a minute. I said, I have this beautiful transcription that I've written out of Schindler's List, and I wanted to talk to you. I'd love for you to
Mm,
hear it sometime. Wanted
yes.
to talk to you. I think it sounds so beautiful. I didn't say much more beautiful, although I do think it sounds more beautiful on the double bass than it does on the violin because it's just so soulful.
Mm,
I said to him, I was curious if you would ever allow me to perform it in a
yes.
recital. I don't, if you want to publish it, do it yourself, absolutely cool. But can I have your permission to perform it on double bass? And it was very interesting. He said to me, oh, well, you'd have to speak with my publisher about that. And I thought, I know where this is headed. And so I said, okay. So his publisher was actually there.
Mm,
So I spoke with him. His name was Paul. And I said, it just sounds beautiful. I could play 30 seconds of it for you just so you can hear how gorgeous the double bass is. And he said, oh, no, 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 no. John is very specific about which instruments can play his pieces. He will allow a cello to play Schindler's List. He
yes.
will allow a violin, he said, but no other instruments are allowed to. In fact, you're not allowed to perform it even in a private recital where no one's paying to hear it. You're
Mm,
not allowed. And I thought, well, that's just kind of mean. And it broke my heart because
mm,
I thought it sounded beautiful. And then, like a year later, there was a bass player who put a transcription that he performed of that piece on YouTube, and I thought, oh God, I hope John doesn't see this because I think he's gonna get in trouble. Um,
Yeah.
but that's one of the challenges is if you transcribe a piece written by a living composer,
Mm.
getting permission and making sure it's okay with them. So I'm all for transcribing music by dead composers.
It does solve many problems. Um,
Yeah.
because if you ask a composer, they have the ability to say no,
Right.
and some really will say no just to say no. It's not all composers are lovely to deal with, and it's interesting. You're saying the Schindler's List you thought had a real soul about it. I
Yeah.
think that about Kol Nidre by Bruch,
Oh, yes.
which I think is a magnificent piece on cello, but on bass,
Oh, I
I
think it's
think it
better.
adds, well, I wasn't going to say better, but now you've said it. I agree with you. I think it does. I had a recording of Gary Carr. I bought an LP. I must have had it one maybe 30 years, 35 years.
Mhm.
Um, and it's still glorious music on the bass. I absolutely love it. And also the uh, block prayer. Again, that's
Yes.
another one. I transcribed it into D minor for us. I had some students who needed something a little bit lower. They couldn't quite manage the F minor.
Hmm.
I did it into D minor, and they absolutely loved it.
Yeah.
Because it's great music. And again, I think the bass adds something that the cello doesn't have. I think the cello maybe adds something the bass doesn't have. But it's
Yes.
absolutely amazing. And no, what's the other one? Vocalese. Um,
Yes.
again, is one of the greatest pieces, I think.
Oh,
And to hear it on bass is absolutely glorious. And
yeah.
certain pieces I think really do sound fantastic on bass. Maybe even better than the original. I don't know. I don't know. It's difficult to say, isn't it? Because you can't make blanket statements. Um,
But
but yeah, you're dead right. Yeah, we can. Yeah, I think that Col Nidre does sound better on the bass.
I think
So
so. I had a student last year come to me. He was a grad student, but he didn't have a ton of classical experience.
mm,
Um, and he said to me that he wanted to play Kol Nidre at the high holidays that year, Yom Kippur.
mm,
And he said he really wanted to learn it for his grandmother. And so, we worked on it and it was hard for him, but he did it. And he said he played it in his synagogue and his grandmother heard it. And he said everyone that heard it said, wow, the double bass is so rich and beautiful and
mm.
so perfect for this piece. And the rabbi said to him, I'd like you to come back next year and do it. I'm not hiring a cello anymore. I want this on double bass.
Wow, isn't that nice?
Yeah, and I said to him,
Wow.
that is the achievement right there.
Yes,
And
exactly.
he was like, "Oh, I didn't play this perfectly or this was really hard." And I said, "That's okay. You'll keep working on it. You'll keep getting it better and, cut yourself a little bit of slack or now we say give yourself some grace.
Right.
It might not have been perfect. You just learned it quickly.
Mm,
It's challenging for someone who hasn't been playing in that
mm.
region of the bass that much. But that the rabbi loved it so much that he wanted
Isn't
to
that
have the
nice?
student back. That is how you know you've done a good job.
Well, with recital music, I always was interested in the original repertoire. That was always very important to me.
Yes.
That I published a lot of music, certainly by contemporary composers, by friends, which I've always enjoyed. But I also wanted the transcriptions as well. And I always tried to keep a balance of about 70% original works to 30% transcriptions.
Yeah.
And I thought that was a nice balance. I've really enjoyed creating the two different aspects of recital music. One is the original repertoire, and one is the transcriptions. And each again complements the other, I think. I think it makes a nice
Yeah.
balanced catalogue. And
Yes.
it's then trying to persuade people to move away from transcriptions to play original repertoire. That's another challenge. But at least if
Right.
the original repertoire is there, it's possible, and that I've enjoyed. But the transcriptions have been a really important part of my professional career, as a
Yes.
player and a teacher and as a publisher, and I don't think it will change. I'm always looking at pieces, always thinking, will that work on bases? Can I transcribe that for bases? I think yesterday was the 400th birthday of William Byrd, the great
Oh, yes.
composer from Elizabeth the first time, and I'm putting a book together called Bird for Basses, which is I think 5 bass quartets,
Oh, I
and
love
the early madrigals and I think some of the galliards and things they transcribe so well for basses, and again it just gives us new repertoire. And I'm sure William Byrd wouldn't mind. I'm sure it'd be astounded that 400 years later, his music is still so popular. Isn't that
definitely,
fantastic?
definitely. Well, and I know you have several collections. I think at Jason Heath's Double Bass headquarters website of
Mm.
collections of transcriptions, and I of course have them. And I love to use them with my students. And I love, having them learn a new piece by a composer that they've never played. A student might have played the elephant, but I say, well, now what about the swan? And you have a great
Exactly.
transcription of that,
Thank you.
which is really great. And it's funny because I sit here as we're talking, I'm starting to think I do transcribe more than I realize. When
Yes.
I play recitals with my dad, we always do a couple of, French art songs or something like that, which obviously were not written for double bass. And he tends to play guitar or electric bass with me. And
Mm.
so he'll be transcribing a piano accompaniment for that, or things like Nessun Dorma. And of course, we do have to throw in some pop tunes every now and then with,
Mm.
bands that I like. And then, I always had this dream of becoming part of the Norwegian pop band Aha, which I knew would never happen. But being able to play their songs, they always lie well on the bass.
Mm.
And, I'll hear a tune. It's very rare. I never wanted to be what we call here elevator music or doctor's office music.
Yes.
Muzak, I think, is the official term for it.
Yeah.
And so I want to be really careful when I'm transcribing a pop tune to not have it sound like Muzak.
Yes.
But I am being self-indulgent learning these songs, literally songs, by a silly little band that I love.
Mhm. When I first started doing Bass Fest, I think the first one was, I think 1997, 1998, something like that. And I got Tony Osborne to write a piece for 12 basses, which I've
Nice.
just published. It's only taken 30 years. And I'm finally there. And I think the very first bass fest I did, there was a teachers concert because we had, I think, about 8, 10, 12 teachers throughout the week. And I
Sure.
arranged a Hallelujah chorus for bass octet.
Oh,
And
nice.
we did that, I think, every bass fest for years and years and years. And all the teachers would say, can we do it again next year? Can we do it again next year? And
Oh,
it hadn't been in print for a long time. And just as we're talking, I'm just thinking, all right, maybe that one's pushing forward now. That one needs to be done.
yeah.
But
Oh,
I need it was a very old because it's 1997, 1998. So I mean, I think I need to go and look at it again and see if it's right, or maybe I need
yeah.
to redo it. But it was in D major, so I know it worked well,
Oh,
and
perfect.
uh, and it was nice because we had 2 quartets. So the one quartet was the singers, one quartet was the orchestra, but then occasionally you'd all have to play and play little bits from everything. The difficulty was the da 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 da, the trumpet. That was
Mm-hmm.
to get that. We couldn't really get that because if it's high harmonics,
Right.
it's not really loud enough.
Mm-hmm.
So I had to put that down an octave, but it seemed to work. It seemed to
Well,
hit the mark really.
I think you've done it right when you're getting requests for repeat performances of it.
Yes, and the other one I really enjoyed doing was the Can Can by Offenbach,
Oh, oh yes.
and that one that took me about 10 attempts before I felt it was right. And I used to do we used to do bass workshops, so I'd write it out and try it, and suddenly the accompaniment was louder than the melody. There's too much accompaniment, and it
Mm-hmm.
took me a long time to work it out. But once I eventually got there, then I think it's actually not a bad arrangement at all. It's I think I did a bass day at the Royal Welsh College some years ago, and they'd learned this quartet, so I had to coach them, and they gave me the score. And as I was reading the score, because I'd forgotten it, and I was thinking, wow, this is not so bad. I've done worse than this, I'll tell you. And I just like the way it just dovetailed so smoothly from melody to accompaniment from one player
Yeah,
to the next. I thought, well, this is okay actually. This
that's
is okay.
nice.
And then we've done it with mass basses and things like
Yeah,
that.
yeah,
And audiences love it obviously because they know the melody.
Right. And I
Mm,
think that's one thing when you're planning, any sort of a performance. If you do have a transcription or two, if it's something that the audience may have already encountered, there's something familiar to them. They
mm,
relax and they really enjoy it. And then I feel like I can throw new music at them. I can throw pieces they've never heard, but they're comfortable because they've heard something familiar. But I think one of the challenges with transcribing is voicing, the partially for the level of the
mm.
player, whether it's a student or someone super advanced. You've got to be careful to make sure the bottom register can sound a little bit, I don't know, muddy maybe.
Mm.
But the higher parts of thumb position in the wrong hands can sound what I call it's the howling dog region. And you just want to make sure that you have the voicing so that it, although will make your audience feel happy because it's something they recognize. You also don't want them to ever cringe because it sounds, too woofy or too howly. All dog references.
That's always something I've taught my students, because often the solo part is in the middle of the accompaniment because we
Right.
play quite low down.
Hmm.
And so you have to have a solo sound which sits on I always call it a cushion of sound. You always have to make sure you sit on the cushion and not fall into the cushion. If
Right.
you fall into the cushion, the piano wins every time because
Right.
it's louder than
Right.
us. If you sit
Hmm.
on the cushion, then the two of you are working together. It's interesting. And
Yes.
they suddenly have to listen with different ears. Um,
Yes.
the transcriptions is that's always a problem with octaves and things like that. But personally, it doesn't bother me. I can live
Yeah.
with that. It's,
Yeah.
considering what's going wrong with the world, it's changing an octave in a piece is neither here nor there, really.
Yes,
Honestly,
I think you're right. Perspective is a good thing. And
exactly.
with a student, for me, if they're having, that really muddy, gross, dying
Mm,
moose sound at the bottom, it's an opportunity to get that to sound cleaner and brighter.
mm,
And if they're sounding like they're strained up in the higher register, it's a chance for them to open up
mm,
their sound. Let's work on bow location and bow speed and arm weight and things like that to get the tone
mm.
going. And it's kind of incentive for them. And when I'm playing, it's funny. I always had this hang up, like an emotional hang up of when I was in thumb position, I didn't want it to sound gross. And I'm sure it's because in the beginning it did sound gross.
Mm,
So I'll still try to be very thoughtful to what is my tone sounding like all
mm.
through the whole region of the instrument. And I don't think that's a bad thing for any of us to think about.
No, and the one thing we have as bass players is we do have a lot of repertoire, we have a vast repertoire, so original
Yes.
repertoire, but
Hmm.
not compared to the cello or violin.
Right.
So we might have, I don't know, 10,000 original pieces, where they've got 100,000 original pieces. So,
Yeah.
but we need transcriptions to balance this out. And I
Yes.
think it really works. And I think we're at a place now where it is pretty good, because we also got great composers writing now original repertoire as well as transcriptions. And I
We
think
do.
it's taken a long time to get here, but I think we're in a really fantastic place where everybody can play now what they like, and it works
Yes.
really well. But I like the fact that we have our own original repertoire as well. I think I've enjoyed being part of that. I've enjoyed commissioning a lot of
Yeah.
repertoire. It's
I
like I feel
wonder,
we need to balance out.
I sometimes wonder if Gary Carr's transcriptions, so much that he transcribed in his career,
Mm,
I wonder how much of that, I think it influenced us greatly, even more than we realize. It forced us all to have better technique. It forced us all to be better bass players. And then it forced others to want to
mm,
write for us or
mm,
enticed them. And it made us realize, hey, if I can transcribe, I can write. Okay, maybe not me personally, but I think it inspired other people to say, we can have more great music that's written
mm,
originally for this wonderful instrument. And I feel like maybe Gary was pivotal for the whole thing, not just people
mm.
accepting and performing transcriptions, but also inspiring people to write more music for us.
I think, yeah, I think you're right. I think it's both. When he used to come to London, I used to see all the transcriptions he used to play, and I go to libraries and get copies of them, and
Hmm.
really do my own editions and things like that. But also, Gary used to, I think he was on the road 8 months of the year, and
Mm.
you can't play bass music for 8 months of the year and stay sane. And
Right?
so he needed to transcribe. And I think that kept him sane, the fact that he was always looking for new repertoire, as well as commissioning original repertoire. So again, I think yeah, Gary did a fantastic job in inspiring all of us. I always came away from every recital thinking, wow, I'm going to go play even better now. And I'd pick up the bass and I'd play with such confidence and assurance.
Mhm.
Yeah, he really had that effect on me, and still does. I hear him play. Wow, yeah,
Yeah.
I'm going to pick up my bass and practice even harder now.
I remember hearing Una Furtiva Lagrima, I think it was Pavarotti singing it. And I looked at my mom, I was a little kid, and I said to her, that would sound great on the bass. And I ran into my room and I started sort of like picking it out on the bass and all that. And then I realized Gary had already recorded it. But I thought, yeah, if I hear an aria or any sort of piece and I like it and I want to try it, there's no reason not to. And I think that sort of, kind of sums up the idea of no limits. There's great
Well,
original music.
Portosini arranged that one. That was in,
Right.
I think, in his method. And Nessun Dorma is one I arranged for 8 basses, which again I did that for Bass Fest. I
I
absolutely
love
loved
that.
it. Yeah,
That's one of my favorite all time arias, too. Well, I think transcriptions and original music, it's really great. I think we're luckier than many instruments because I think we have a better balance.
I
Um,
agree.
be-
I agree.
and I think that's very exciting. Well, thank you, everybody. Thank you, David. I think this was a great talk. And thank you, everybody, for listening to Bass Talk with Hagen and Hayes. Go to our YouTube channel, go to our website, like and subscribe. And thank you so much to our sponsors. And we look forward to talking to you again. Take
Bye.
care.